Hello and welcome to Noble Mind.
The Noble Mind podcast is brought to you by the Institute for Meditation and Psychotherapy. Hello, I'm Alex Gökçe.
And I'm Dr. Kate King. In this episode, we talk to Douglas Baker about meditation, mindfulness, yoga, and the retreat experience.
Douglas Baker is a licensed social worker and Kripalu yoga teacher. He's the founder of Cambridge Mind Body, a holistic counseling practice in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and of Wellbeing's Retreats, where he guides clients on individual counseling and mindfulness-based retreats. He's the author of 5-Minute Mindfulness, Walking. He's a former clinician of the Psychiatric Emergency Service at Cambridge Hospital and currently on the board of directors of the Institute for Meditation and Psychotherapy.
You can get this episode's show notes at noblemindpodcast.com and follow us on social media at noblemindpodcast. We hope you enjoy the show. All right. Well, we are here with Doug Baker. Thanks you so much for being with us today. And why don't we just start off with a little bit of your background, a little bit about yourself and your work. How'd you get interested in yoga, meditation?
Yeah, I'm still trying to figure that out myself. How did this happen? Well, thank you. It's delightful to be here. And you've been doing such a lovely job with these podcasts. It's a lovely service for IMP and for the community more broadly. So thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah, so let's see. Well, let's see. Long story short, I've worked in the human services for over 30 years, but about 25 years ago, really happenstance led me to collide with the contemplative traditions. I'd heard about this phenomenon called meditation retreats and was kind of vaguely interested. And then a good friend of mine and his wife were going on a meditation retreat and kind of invited me to come along. And this now here I'm really dating myself again. This is about 25 years ago. In the old days, you could just sort of show up. They always had empty cushions, and now of course, everything's like sold out and often, and you have to, plan it way months in advance and all that. And it's waiting list, which is wonderful, right? Yeah. It's just really, it's gotten so much more popular. So, went on this meditation retreat with my dear friends, and essentially I came away. I remember I went back. I was working at a psychiatric hospital, and afterwards, one of my friends at the hospital said, "So, what did you learn on that meditation retreat?" And I remember, I was only partly joking when I said, "Well, I learned my mind is completely out of control," and it really shocked me because the instructions were, seemingly, quote unquote easy. Oh, just focus your attention on your breath. And it was like I couldn't do it for more than a nanosecond, and it was a kind of awakening in a way. It was a rude awakening. I was like, wow, my mind is utterly out of control. I can't focus. And I just saw that it was like this trash heap of all these discarded, really unhelpful, tawdry, just all these thoughts. And I was like, wow, it's a mess in there, But of course, I've come to understand that that's a way in, when we first begin to see that the mind is out of control, that can, it can motivate us to become curious about, so what do I do about that? And though I also felt right from the beginning, I had some kind of intuitive sense that the Dharma teachings that were presented, they resonated with me in some way that I thought there's something really true in this, and this can help me. I just had a kind of a faith in that. And so I never really stopped. At the same time, I think it was the same year. So this was like 1995. A friend of mine living in the building where I lived was beginning to teach yoga, and she invited me to a yoga class. And I said, sure, I'll come to your yoga class. I'd never done yoga. And I had kind of a similar experience of kind of like, wow. In this case, it was in terms of the physical practices that this, petite woman was doing. And I was this really, jockey kind of guy who had a lot of pride in my physical, strength and whatnot. And here was this young woman doing these postures that I couldn't really do. And so I got my motivation with yoga was really competitive. You know, it's like, if she can do it, I want to be able to do it, you know. But so it was the same year that I got introduced to these two kind of twin contemplative traditions. And it might be interesting to talk a little bit about why I would refer to yoga as a contemplative tradition, because that's not typically how we think of it. But maybe we'll get back to that.
Yeah, absolutely. I was thinking as you were talking about going on retreat and sitting with your mind and suddenly seeing the trash heap, as it were, the mess in there, that, you know, I think a lot of people probably have that experience, even just trying to sit for 10 minutes when they're first starting, you know, and just sort of struck by how, you know, for you, and I think for, you know, for a lot of people, that makes you curious, and it makes you kind of say, oh, I wonder what's going on in there. Let me try to understand this better, you know, as opposed to, like, it would be very easy to say, I'm just going to put the lid back on that and walk away. Like, that was hard. No thanks, you know? So.
Yeah. And the narrative that can come out of that, unfortunately, that I think we in the industry can warn people about, is the narrative that sometimes naturally arises is like, oh, I can't meditate. I can't do this. And that's been a very important thing for me to understand. It's like, no, it doesn't mean that at all.
Right.
You know, it just means you're witnessing, you know, the busy mind, the conditioned mind. Doesn't mean you can't meditate. Yeah. So fortunately, I was able to be curious. Yeah,
there's a certain amount of self-efficacy, I think, you know, or some sort of sense of capacity to be able to approach that, you know, that sort of asks us to have.
And I think that's one of the points you make in your book, 5-Minute Mindfulness Walking, where realizing when your mind has wandered is, at that point, you're also practicing mindfulness. It's not a failure to be mindful, but actually you're actually doing it.
Yes. Yeah. That's one of the paradoxes too, that, generally we're not going to get the thinking mind to shut up a whole lot. You know, it's going to keep kind of secreting thoughts, you know. Like the salivary gland is like secreting saliva, more or less nonstop. But that's not a problem. You know, that's not a failure, like you said, Alex. You know, it's like, that's what we're witnessing, and it's all okay. Yeah.
I'd love to hear that connection with yoga that you mentioned, you know, about how yoga and meditation, it seems like for you from the very beginning, were very connected. And this idea of yoga as a contemplative practice.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting, hopefully not just like a dusty old, footnote or something, or an asterisk, but, we now know yoga primarily as this kind of fitness methodology with a little bit of spirituality sprinkled into it, and maybe a bit of mindfulness. And that's all fine, the way that we practice yoga here. And it can be helpful to understand that really yoga started, when yoga started, it had nothing to do with fitness. Zero, less than zero, even. Because yoga goes back, roughly, yoga is mentioned in the Vedas, which are the earliest texts in what we now call India, in that culture. And yoga is mentioned there. So we dated back 4,000 to 5,000 years. That's a very long time ago. And if we think about what life was like, and now bear with me here, I'm going on a little bit of a tangent. Think about what life was like 4,000 to 5,000 years ago in what we now call India, or even 400 to 500 years ago, right? So just let's consider that there was no public transportation. There were no desk jobs. There were no white collar jobs, right? Everybody was working with their physical bodies. Virtually everybody, right, was working with their physical bodies. Most people were farmers, nomads with domesticated animals, right? And everybody had plenty of exercise. So the last thing they needed was more exercise, right? Can you imagine the two, farmers saying, "Hey, after we get the crops in, what do you say we run downtown and catch that 5:30 yoga class? Because I could really use a workout." Right. I'm being a little, comical about it, but, just think about that. It's like, no, it had nothing to do with that. It was really a mystical, psychological, spiritual tradition, and a methodology to help people with the problems of the mind and to achieve these non-ordinary states, to kind of transcend the mind, to use some of the language that we now use in how we talk about mindfulness. So it really was essentially a kind of a form of mindfulness. It was a way to kind of, leverage the mind to one's advantage. The main difference, we might say, between the yoga tradition and the meditation tradition is that the yogis have taught you can use the physical body. You can take a simple action in the physical body, like changing your pattern of breathing or changing your posture or holding a posture, to help focus the mind, to help leverage or influence the mind, if you will. Where the Buddhist tradition, meditation tradition, generally says, no, you just leave the body and the breath the way it is. There's no need to intervene with it. Yeah, you sit upright and that sort of stuff. There's minimal kind of actions in the body. And that's one way to describe the main, where they kind of diverge. Mm-hmm. Last interesting, just little side note is, from some perspectives, the Buddha studied with early yoga teachers, because yoga, that tradition was percolating right along. Mm-hmm. And when I say yoga in those days, really was like the concentration practices. Mm-hmm. So it's fair to say that he learned the concentration practices from yoga teachers, not the ones wearing the Lululemon,
and not as we know it now.
Not as we know it now, but he learned to concentrate his mind before he had his breakthrough about suffering and the Four Noble Truths and what we now call mindfulness. I've been just fortunate to study with some wonderful teachers in both traditions, and it's been really fun and juicy to work with the interplay between those two. Kind of like the more the cognitive Buddhist practice, mindfulness practice, and the more somatic body aided yoga practices.
I don't know if you've noticed this at all, but when I've had occasion to teach meditation or mindfulness to people who are yoga practitioners, who are now kind of trying to get more into the mindfulness or meditation practices, there's much more of a focus on like, well, how do I sit? Like, what's my posture? What do I do with my body? Like, they kind of bring that embodied sort of yogic perspective to it. And, in a lot of, as you're saying, in this sort of, as meditation is taught these days, there's not a lot of focus on the body. It's just sort of like, well, sit comfortably and it'll be fine.
Yeah, right. It'll be fine. Yeah, and I think they're both good messages. You don't need any fancy posture to practice mindfulness. You don't have to worry about it. If you need to lean back on your chair, that's fine. It's what I usually tell people. If you can sit up straight and have the torso be self-supported, there's some benefit in that. But yeah, they're fine. It's interesting. I'm trained in the Kripalu yoga tradition from the Kripalu Center in Western Massachusetts, and Swami Kripalu, kind of warned his students about focusing too much on getting the right posture. Mm-hmm. He has a wonderful there's a wonderful quote from him that said, "The posture is a spiritual doorway. Go through the posture into a different kind of mystical experience or a different experience of awareness or consciousness, but don't spend a lot of time polishing the doorknob. It's just a doorknob. Just use it to open the door. That's the posture." So he said it's really just a vehicle, again, for the mind, for consciousness. But don't get all caught up in it. And now I think that's one of the, I don't know if I would say it's unfortunate, but it's one of the misunderstandings, or just the way yoga has kind of morphed, is that there's often a lot of understanding of yoga is like, oh, you're supposed to be able to do these postures. You're supposed to be able to get your leg behind your head and that. And if you can't, then you can't do yoga, or you're not good at yoga. So the more original teachings of yoga say, just use the body to help you with the mind. It doesn't matter what the posture is.
So do you think of walking meditation as a step in that direction, sort of not as disembodied perhaps as sitting meditation?
Yeah, I think so. It can be. It can be a little bit of a hybrid practice where we get a little more involved, a little more embodied, right? Because there's more tending to the body of how we're stepping and feeling the movements. So there's more material for the mind to get focused on.
So is there a special spot in your heart for walking meditation because you wrote a book on it, and perhaps you also incorporate it into the retreats that you lead?
Yeah, definitely. Well, as you probably know, I mean, there are so many different ways to practice mindfulness and meditation. Thich Nhat Hanh talks about, chopping the vegetable, meditation, and brushing the teeth meditation. It's just wonderful. So we can literally do it with anything, taking a shower, driving our car, in conversation. So one simple nice thing about walking meditation is it's a break from the sitting meditation. When you're on retreat, you really can't sit all day long. The body can't tolerate that, right? But I have found and enjoyed that it's a way to be outdoors. It's a way to bring movement into meditation. And it's a way to maybe make it a little more concrete that meditation isn't just something that we do in this seated position on a cushion or on a chair, that we really can take it out, quote unquote, into the world. And so whether we're on a retreat, walking in some lovely little grove or a lawn or something, or we're just walking through the supermarket or, down the street or in the parking lot or in our office or wherever, we can do a little bit of mindful walking.
Yeah, I feel like right now, as we're recording this, we're in the midst of the COVID shelter in place or stay at home safely order or whatever different states are calling it. So a lot of us are, kind of staying at home and going out for our one allowed walk a day, and I feel like some of what you're teaching here would be really appropriate, relevant, and helpful for people right now, to think about how do I get outside a little bit and really savor it and take it in, since I can't be outside for a really long time. I can't go a lot of places, but I can walk to the end of my street and back, or I have to make a trip to the grocery store and maybe I'm nervous to do that right now.
Yeah, I think that tradition of walking meditation might be helpful. And I love your word, like savor, as you said. Can we savor the moment when we're out for the walk? But it just reminds me that there's the walking meditation, and that's just one technique to become mindful. What most matters is, so where will the mind go on that walk? We may walk up the street, and that's our physical location, but can we keep the mind in the body? Is your mind going to go elsewhere? Is your mind going to go into April and May and June? And that's happening for all of us, right?
Yeah.
It's just, what's April going to be like? What's May going to be?
Right.
September. My daughter's supposed to start college in September, and we're it's a big question mark. We don't know what's going to happen. And that's natural that we're all somewhat preoccupied and a bit stressed and worried, even anxious about the future. That's perfectly natural. But it's not helpful for us to hang out there a whole lot and to really plant our flag, in the future and get really worried about that, because it's not happening yet, So that's the practice, is to notice really the intention of all of these practices we could summarize as just building awareness of what the mind is up to. What is my mind doing right now? Where is it taking me? Is it taking me into this imagined future in a way that's not helpful? Again. Once again, here I am. I'm off in the future, and then we can notice that, and it's not wrong. And now I'm drawing a little bit on like the therapeutic framework called acceptance commitment therapy, which is kind of a derivative of Buddhist, kind of mindfulness-based cognitive therapy. It goes by the acronym ACT, and is developed by Stephen Hayes and Russ Harris. It's a wonderful methodology if one is friendly with mindfulness or enjoys the mindfulness perspective, because it really makes it very concrete and applicable. And so one of the concepts they use is that thought helpful? So it takes the judgment out of it. Is like, I'm not supposed to be thinking about the future, or it's a failure for me to be worried about the future, but like, how helpful is it really? Including like, how helpful is it for us to be listening to the news all day long? It's another one of the challenges, right? So is it helpful to go with those thoughts? And when we recognize, no, maybe not that helpful, then we can come back and, oh, I'm just walking down the sidewalk. Here's my feet touching. Here's my body. I feel my hips, the hip sockets, the joints, and here I am again. I'm back in reality, in my body's movements.
Right. And you might even notice that your body is anxious, right? You might feel that if you're tense, you might feel the tension in your body and say, oh, my shoulders are tight, or, oh, my stomach is turning or something, but it stays more in the moment and less out in the future or somewhere else.
Yes.
So your book is titled 5-Minute Mindfulness Walking, and it is a book of short essays and exercises meant to be read, digested, and completed in 5 minutes. It's also very charmingly illustrated. And I think those exercises could fit very well for people who are sheltering in place. Even though it appears deceptively simple, it's actually a book that discusses many Buddhist teachings and their relevance to well-being in the context of walking meditation. So your book and also your videos, I imagine, can be very helpful for people at this time.
Hopefully so, yeah. And as we're talking about walking meditation, you don't have to even walk outside to do that practice. Recently, not too long ago, a yoga teacher friend of mine showed me something that she had learned in one of her trainings recently, of just like taking a walk on your yoga mat, just like from one end of the yoga mat to the other, and then get to the end and then turn around. And so that's about all the space you need, or like a little area rug. You don't have to really go anywhere.
I think we saw a news headline recently of somebody who had run a marathon on their balcony, just going back and forth.
Oh, that's hilarious. That's wonderful. Wow.
So we have no excuses.
Right. Oh, darn it.
Yeah, right. Yeah. But I love that the yoga, right? You can kind of do the perimeter of the yoga mat, or, move back and forth, or.
Yes. So you don't need any special, you don't even need a yoga mat,
Right,
you just need a little bit of space.
Yeah.
And your mindful walking can be right there. And, I think the other thing that is helpful, can be helpful about that practice, is a lot of people just find it, especially in the beginning. There's so many people now who are curious about mindfulness. They've heard about it. They kind of want to try it, but actually sitting down, especially now, in this, atmosphere of the pandemic, naturally everyone is sitting with some anxiety, holding some anxiety, and so it can just be hard to sit with oneself and to literally sit and do nothing. So the walking meditation can be a little bit of a gentler way in for some people. It gives you a little more to do, that you don't have to literally just sit there. But it's training, it is a pathway to train the attention just to come back and notice the stepping and the lifting and the moving and your breathing as you move around your little rug or whatever it is. But you don't have to just sit if that's hard.
Yeah, that's great. And it's also, I've noticed that too, that I think, whether it's, just at certain times where you have that more anxious or busy energy, it's good to do mindful movement instead of sitting in stillness. And then also, maybe temperamentally, some people just do a little bit better with the movement versus that stillness.
Yes, temperamentally, like you say. Yeah. Yeah. And, when I kind of, if you will, prescribe or suggest meditation to people, clients or students I'm working with, I try to keep that in mind and try to make that part of the conversation. It's like, for some people, it's going to be better to be moving rather than sitting. And that's part of the, there's a lot happening now in the mindfulness world around being, sensitive about trauma and sensitive, kind of meditation and safety. The folks down at Brown have Willoughby Britton and her collaborators down at Brown have done a lot of great work around the possible adverse effects of meditation for some folks, that it's not appropriate, that it can be overwhelming, including focus, sitting still, can be just too much for some folks, and can just lead to kind of more stress and more anxiety. So for some, it might be better to keep the attention out of the body, moving through the world, going for a run, going for a walk, a slow walk, or a brisk walk might be more indicated for some people. And I think we do well to keep that in mind when we're suggesting meditation for people. I'm thinking of a lovely younger woman I've been working with, and she has really found that the meditation is not right for her at this time in her life. But she's a runner, and she goes on these marvelous long runs of 4 or 5 miles or something like that. She's really quite fit, and she loves getting the energy out. But she finds that she gets into a zone in her mind, where her mind gets, relatively empty, and she's just kind of noticing the movements and whatnot. And so that's her practice. That's her meditation practice. And I remember her coming in one day and saying, like, is that okay?
Right. Get approval from the yoga teacher and the therapist. And
yeah, right.
Yeah.
Is it all right? Is this, is this good? Is this an okay way to do it? Like, of course. That's great. Yeah, it's all good.
In one of our upcoming episodes, we're going to interview David Treleaven, who wrote a book about trauma-informed mindfulness.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
It's a good time, I think, that we're starting to develop this more sophisticated or nuanced understanding of what types of meditation and mindfulness are indicated for people, or maybe problematic, or even have adverse effects for other people. I think if we look back over the course of the history of meditation or mindfulness in the West, I think there have been times where it's been kind of a panacea in some way, or everyone should be able to do it in this one way, which is sitting, not moving, watching your breath. And if you can't do that, you fail. And I mean, I'm not saying that's, the lesson all the teachers were necessarily saying, but that's what people have, took away from some of this. So it's really, really nice to see that there's much more of an understanding of the variety of practices that can work for different people and what the different needs are that people bring. So I think maybe at times the people it worked for kept coming back to the centers in doing it, and the people for whom it didn't work or who had adverse effects just would disappear, So it's something that I'm very sensitized to, and as I think about sharing these practices with people as well.
Great. Yeah. Because otherwise, as we touched on earlier, it's easy for people to conclude, I can't meditate,
Right.
There's no way in for me, because I can't do this sitting. And it's like, no, it takes a lot of trial and error to find what's the right practice, eyes open or eyes closed.
Right.
Should I really just be sitting by myself? What about moving?
Right. Yeah. And everybody at the meditation center and the yoga class are all sort of saying, well, this works for me, so what's your problem kind of. So it's nice that there's more diversity of practices being offered and more understanding of that now. So you had mentioned some of your work with clients, and you've been doing some interesting stuff with personalized retreats and kind of intensive counseling / yoga meditation interventions for people. I'd love to hear a little bit more about how that's developed and the kind of stuff you're doing there.
Oh, sure. Yeah. I guess from when I first started investigating the contemplative practices, I was working in the mental health world, and I worked for a long time as a clinical social worker, inpatient hospital units, and just, it was just wonderful experiences, learned so much. But at the same time, here I was, studying, going on these retreats and studying yoga. And I just, it was kind of like this peanut butter and chocolate kind of thing of just like, is there any way these two could go together in a good way, And I thought, maybe they can, So I've been just curious about that for the longest time. And, when I finished my yoga teacher training, my basic training about a dozen years ago, first thing I did was immediately set up this, what I called like a yoga for mental health class, where I was, kind of offering the class with an intention that people could use it as a kind of a platform to perhaps work with their, mental health challenges or their mental health goals in some way. And one of the concepts is, there's a lot of mindfulness in yoga. Witnessing your experience as you practice yoga and kind of cultivating, strengthening this witnessing capacity in the mind, and what Kripalu Yoga calls witness consciousness. to non-judgmentally notice your experience. It's, it's mindfulness, but it can be done in a yoga practice, even in a vigorous yoga practice. And then, so I just kind of continued to tinker with this idea, got yoga mats in my office, got a bigger office that we could spread the yoga mats out. And, but I've also always been so drawn to the outdoors and the experience of being on retreat as well had such an impact on me personally. And I saw it and I heard it from other people. Of like, it's just such a simple but powerful technology, if you will, that you go to this special place with this particular intention that you're going to do your best to learn about yourself and to become present in this particular way, right? That we call, kind of meditation and mindfulness. But it's no accident that it involves going to this special place that's kind of off the grid, and it's marvelous that some of the meditation, I've gone to IMS, the Insight Meditation Society in Barrie, as many people have in this area. And the last few times I've been there have been these wonderful little rituals there about, okay, now everybody who's willing, let's break up with our cell phones for for the duration of the retreat. And some teachers have a lovely ritual where each person goes up one at a time and they put their cell phone in the basket, and then they ring the bell and everybody bows, honoring I honor your renunciation from your cell phone.
I love it.
And it's just beautiful. It's a little bit humorous too, and it's kind of fun and but really invokes, how hard it is now to get off the grid. Yeah. Because of course your little black box goes with you, and you got it right in your back pocket. So these are all things that have gotten me, just really curious about, could psychotherapy be aided in some ways by some of these other processes, by these embodied practices of yoga, even by changing location? We're taught in graduate school that, what you do as a therapist is you have this special room and you get some chairs and you get a box of Kleenex and,
a clock and a couch.
A clock and a couch, right? What else do you need? That might be about it, right? That's all well and good, right? But personally, I'm a little too restless to really just stay in an office all the time. I want to be outdoors, and having benefited from being on retreat, including the outdoor access of most retreat centers, that's what led me to think about cultivating exploring a different process. And so that now has evolved into a service where I take folks one-on-one for 2, 3, 4, 5 days. And we work together one-on-one for a fairly long day, something like a 10, 12-hour day, where it's a combination of experiences depending on the unique, needs of the client. We're walking in nature, we're maybe sitting out in nature, weather permitting, and if everybody's got the right Gore-Tex and whatnot. And we're doing some yoga, if that's appropriate. We're certainly practicing mindfulness, and then we're doing mindfulness-informed or mindfulness-based psychotherapy as well. And it's a way for people to go, it can be a way for people to go more deeply into a psychotherapeutic framework than perhaps the 50 or 55 minute or 45 minute, office-based session can afford. And I wouldn't say it's better, but it's different. And it's been a very rich experience that I'm very grateful for. It's clearly not for everybody. It's for a small subset of folks who are perhaps a little adventurous, definitely requires an open mind. But we, most of us who've been on retreat have had these rather profound experiences of the mind slowing down or becoming more spacious, or just we access a different way of being on retreat, or at least we sense that it's possible, even if we can't quite slow down or our mind doesn't stop churning. We know that there's something in this. There's a reason this has been practiced for thousands of years. And so it's possible in psychotherapy, I think, to expand the frame, to work with people in these other settings.
Is it a bit like a one-to-one tutoring on Buddhist approach to experiencing? And also you're keeping the client company and demonstrating and
all of that
for them how one may relate to things differently.
Yes. There's a good bit of psychoeducation that goes on. I tend to give people, I think it's really helpful to empower our clients as, if you will, consumers of mental health services. So I also tend to include kind of a short primer on psychotherapy of kind of like the different schools of psychotherapy in a very brief, kind of simplified way from, in very simple terms, what's the difference between psychodynamic therapy and, say, CBT? Because most folks have no idea, right? And they pick a therapist, say, online. Oh, this person looks friendly and whatever, and their office is accessible, blah, blah, blah. Okay, it's reasonable, right? But they often don't know, what's the methodology here, what to expect. And so, so I make that part of the process as well, which I do with my office clients as well. I think it's an important service for us to educate folks about what the options are.
You also emphasize the importance of explaining to clients the why. Why should you be mindful? Why should you do that? As opposed to, this is good for you. Why don't you do it?
That's right. It's right. I mean, and I think that's what, that's what I've gleaned from some of what the Buddha's teachings are, or what we understand as the Buddha's teaching. I always say that with an asterisk, whatever's been sort of handed down in that oral, later written tradition. I think it's always good to take it with a grain of salt. We don't really know what this person, the Buddha, really said, but I think we have a pretty good idea that, the teachings of that particular person said, well, look, this is what I think really works, but you have to check it out yourself. Don't do this just because I say so. You have to check your own experience. And does this seem helpful? And to understand also, like, why are we doing this? What's the intention of the practice? Why is it good for us potentially to sit down and concentrate our attention, or then to move into open awareness or mindfulness? Why? What's the intention of that?
And give the person a map of the road ahead.
Yeah. And I like to talk about the map of the mind in a really simple way, not the brain, but the mind, which can be correlated with some mapping of the brain. But essentially, that we have two parts of the mind, we might say. That 99.9% of the time we're in what's called the thinking mind. That's where all the content is, all the thoughts and memories and images and notions and whatnot. But then there's this other little space that many of us never even realized was there until somebody kind of led us there, which is the observing mind, where there's no content. It's just noticing what's happening. And we can even point the observing mind at the thinking mind. And lo and behold, it opens up these other ideas of like, oh, maybe you don't have to be so controlled by those thoughts. You don't have to be so loyal to them. You don't have to identify with the thoughts that arise in the mind, and likewise the emotions. And so there we get into the, these kind of rather sophisticated ideas of the non-identification, even the non-self, but just in a very, very simple way.
That seems like a good place where the retreats would come in, or just practice comes in, because this idea of, say, non-self or witnessing, or, this stuff can feel really abstract or kind of heady, or like it just becomes another concept maybe. But when you spend a day on retreat, if you do one of these retreat programs, or you go on a longer retreat, or, you just sit, or you practice regularly, then you start to have some experiential understanding of what that means, in a way that, like, I think that's something that gets lost sometimes in traditional psychotherapy, is that people will come in and you sit on the, they sit on the proverbial couch and you talk a lot, but that can stay very much kind of frontal lobe, it's just very like conceptual.
Yeah.
So as therapists and healers in general, to really help guide people back to having an experience of something different.
Beautifully said. Yeah, absolutely. The experience. Yeah, because we can, otherwise we're thinking, and that tends to be tends to be the hammer in the toolbox. We tend to just grab the hammer,
Right.
and just and then they say, like they say in AA, if the only tool you have is a hammer, everything starts looking like a nail.
Right.
Just
Yeah.
grab
Right.
the hammer,
Yeah. Right.
think about it, and
Yeah.
therapy can be this thing where you talk and you think, and yet aren't we really trying to guide our clients to a different experience of their inner world?
Exactly.
So how are we going to do that if we're only just talking about it?
Right.
We stay in that limited talking place,
Yes.
that process, right?
Yeah.
So yes, like retreat can offer that of like, okay, now we're not going to talk for the next hour and a half or whatever it might be, or you can go on a silent retreat. It's like there's no talking for, the whole time. But and what's so, I think it's such an interesting time to be in the mental health field, because now more and more of us who are interested in the mindfulness-based approaches are maybe guiding our clients into a 5 or 10 minute mindfulness session at the beginning of a session, right? And I think that's terrific.
Yeah.
And yet we don't really know. There's no research yet that says, is that really doing anything?
Right.
Is that enough?
Yeah.
Is that enough time? And I have my doubts about that. And I do it with most of my clients. We begin with 5 or 10 or even 15 or sometimes 20 minutes of the practice. And of course, I ask them on their anecdotal, sense of like, is this helping? Are you experiencing something different? Is there something in this for you? And most people say there is, and yet still we don't really know how effective is that. So what's happening in the mindfulness-based psychotherapy world is, we're really in this very grassroots way. We're really experimenting, and that's okay. Psychotherapy has always been an experiment, right?
Yeah.
But it's good to keep that in mind that we don't really know if that's enough time outside of the cognizing process.
Which, for the record, I'm a big fan of talking and thinking. I think we we do need to do both in life. It's just that we need to do other things too.
The personal counseling retreats also remind me of the whole topic of habit change. So I imagine as you accompany a person, you're also perhaps deconditioning certain habits and creating new habits. Or to say it in Buddhist terms, like purifying karma and placing pebbles on a little mound. So that must be useful for habit change, and could be in a major way, I imagine.
It really can be, I think. Yes, and I love the way you say it, everything from, purifying karma to just habit change, it's different ways to talk about a similar process. But yes, again, we can, in psychotherapy, in our say 15-minute hour, we can encourage people and kind of tell them, if you will, that, research shows that when people do this more, they can have a kind of a different experience, and that can even lead to, habit change. But to go on a retreat is to embody it for those days that you're there, or at least to intend to embody it, and to go through the motions of like, oh, so this is what it's like to have no TV for these, 3-4 days or whatever it is, and to not have my cell phone in my pocket the whole time, and to slow down when eating, and to walk out somewhere and stand and actually look at the trees for 20 or 30 minutes and notice them, swaying and so we actually do it, as opposed to, again, often in therapy, we're talking about it.
Yes.
Yeah. Right.
Which is good too, right?
Yeah, certainly. In your book, you quote that funny sentence from James Joyce's Dubliners about Mr. Duffy living at a little distance from his body. How do you see the place of the body and embodiment in psychological healing and becoming whole? As a yoga teacher, as a certified yoga teacher?
Well, of course, we live in a body, and much, starting with Herb Benson and people before him, we've been trying to, find a kind of a holistic sense of how can we remember that, what we're thinking about affects the body, and how we're holding the body affects the mind and the nervous system. So to make that, that's just this vast sort of area of inquiry. But to make it really simple, like I often teach people to just notice, are you holding your facial muscles tight? And what does it feel like? What's the experience if you're willing, and if you'd like to, and if you can soften them? What does that feel like? And it's hard to describe what it feels like, but often people say, oh, there's something that feels softer, gentler, maybe calmer, more vulnerable, more open, just with softening the facial muscles, like we soften the jaw and bring it down a little further into the shoulders. So those are two simple things that I often encourage people to do. Just notice your facial muscles. Notice, are you holding your shoulders sort of up towards your earlobes? And what does it feel like if you can soften them and let them melt a little bit? And we know that there's an interplay, it's different for everyone. But that's a simple way in to tune people into the fact that, what you're doing with your body is, your nervous system is like listening to your body, if you will, it's literally plugged in, right? And likewise, when we're thinking, more kind of stress-based thoughts or worried thoughts, like at this time, a lot of us are having, these regular kind of worried thoughts about the future and what may be lost and what may never come back, and including, of course, illness and even death, right? But that's affecting, what's happening in the adrenal glands and what the stress hormones are in the bloodstream and all of those things. So, it's such a rich, again, to kind of broaden the frame of psychotherapy. It's such a rich way to do that, and to invite people to also be aware of the body.
Yeah, and I've been noticing as I've been spending a lot more time on the computer and on Zoom that I'm using my body really differently now than I typically do. I don't tend to have, I don't have a desk job. I'm either teaching or I'm with clients in a, chair in a therapy office or something. And now I'm spending the whole day basically sitting at a desk, which I know some people that's what they were doing before. But I am noticing my body is being used very differently. And, as you were talking, I'm aware like, I do this thing with my muscles in my neck and my head when I'm looking at the screen, and it's like, that can actually soften when I bring my attention to it. But it's you have to remember to bring the attention back. It's a little bit like meditation. You notice your breath and you come back. It's like you notice things are getting tense and then you soften.
My wife is a full-time yoga teacher, and she's just transitioned all of her, like many yoga teachers and other people, has transitioned all of her classes onto Zoom, and she's spending, way more time now looking at a computer. And she was just telling me a day or two ago about a simple practice for people who are now spending a lot of time on Zoom. It's called 20-20-20, that about every 20 minutes or so, if you can remember to take your eyes off of the screen and look about 20 feet away or into the distance as best you can, and then linger there for about 20 seconds at that 20 feet away spot. And that will help the eyes to not develop the same kind of fatigue is the teaching. And I've been doing that when I can remember. It's hard to remember, but that's an example of it. Yeah. I think also for therapists too, some simple yoga is to notice like how we're sitting in the office with our clients. And of course, this applies to clients as well, to anybody. But, because we're often holding the body in a certain way, which may not be the best for us in terms of our energy, in terms of how much tension we're kind of holding around the efforts of the work. And so, studying yoga has led me to sit differently in my office. I tend to sit more kind of in an upright way, but I tend to, as you were saying, I tend to be more noticing how's my posture. Am I holding tension in a way that's not so helpful? Can I soften that? And personally, I found I'm a lot more alert. I'm a lot more energized. With just sort of like leaning back in the chair less. It's okay to lean back. So making the work sustainable, I think, as we're all now doing more of these seated Zoom meetings, perhaps that can help you tune into how you're holding your body.
Yeah, and there can be such a tendency, especially for, people in that helping role, to really, you get so connected to the other person's experience. And if they're suffering, then you might be sort of leaning towards them, or you might be mirroring their tension in some way too. You might sort of find yourself in a similar body state as the person you're sitting with those mirror neurons firing and all that stuff going on, that it takes a practice to kind of hold your own seat, while also offering that space and connection to other people.
Yes. Yes.
You're right about the power of intention. You're right. Setting an intention imbues our actions with purpose and brings us into fuller alignment with what's important to us. Why is intention so important?
Well, sometimes I think I'll be a little cheeky about this, or like slightly humorous, but sometimes I think the whole Buddhist teaching can be boiled down to attitude is everything.
Mm.
It's really, at the core is what's our attitude, or what's our response or our intention to around whatever is happening. There's what's happening in the world, and then there's our response to what's happening. Viktor Frankl said, there's between the stimulus and the response, there's a space where we can tune into how we are responding.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot rests on that, so in many ways, to speak about it from a psychotherapeutic point of view, there's a way to think about psychotherapy, which we might say is a little more the traditional by some description, maybe even, back to Freud, about what matters is the content that's arising in the mind and the emotions, right? And that's all well and good. Sure, it matters, right? That's what people are kind of working with, right? But the mindfulness or the Buddhist view says, yes, that's all important. That's all good, right? But also there's this other half of the experience is and then how are you responding to that? How are you relating? What's your intention?
Mm-hmm.
And we often are holding an intention that we don't even realize, that we may be, walking through the world, moving through our day in a way that's rather defended.
Mm-hmm.
Which is not wrong. Maybe we need to be defended. Maybe it's helpful to be defended, but it's really useful to just be curious about that. Is it helpful, in fact, for me to be defended in this moment?
Mm-hmm.
What would it be like for me to try the intention of being defenseless, to drop my defendedness and be open to my experience? That might be helpful, might not, right? But so it's an invitation to really tune into how we're responding to the moment. And so much of our experience rests on that.
So if we're not responding with conscious intention, we may be being pulled around by unconscious intentions, perhaps even not our own intentions, someone else's intentions.
Yeah, maybe even cultural intentions, right? Or our family of origin intentions, or, it's like our karma, like our mind, our conditioned mind that's absorbed all of these influences is leading us around, right? And the efficacy that can come from something as simple as mindfulness practices, we realize, wait, I have a choice about this. Is this the intention that I want? Do I want to act on my desire to consume more stuff? Do I want to just go with that intention? Or do I want to consider that and say, maybe I don't. Maybe I will benefit from not acting on that. So observing that craving or that desire for more, the new whatever, the new device or the next thing you want to eat or whatever, just for one example around consumption, very culturally conditioned kind of pattern, right? And how many of our therapy clients come in to see us and they're driven by some desire for something to be different, which can be helpful and wholesome and can be the motivation in therapy, but there can be an unhelpful part of that as well, that they're maybe trying to get rid of or to become something that's just not possible yet. They can't rid themselves of let's say their anxiety at this point. Mm-hmm. They want to be the non-anxious person, right? But right now, perhaps they can't, it's not the time for them to get there. They need to learn to kind of coexist with their anxiety. Mm-hmm. Rather than kind of grasping for the, kind of the thing that they think they need at that moment,
Yeah, this is one of those paradoxes, I think, where if you want to get rid of something, the best thing you can do is stop trying to get rid of it.
Yeah. I'm reminded that wonderful pithy statement that's attributed to Carl Rogers. I think this is accurate, where it's something like, when I accept myself as I am, then I can change.
Right. And I think that's Marsha Linehan uses similar language in DBT as well, when she talks about the sort of dialectic between acceptance and change. That's another big part of her approach too.
Yes.
You write about what the Zen Buddhists call the razor's edge, the territory where opposing truths come together. And paradox as the highest achievement of human thought, where opposing ideas can both be true and together reveal a greater truth.
Yeah.
And mindfulness practices allows us to grapple with this territory.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. And we often kind of sit right on that edge. We're making an effort to pay attention, but we're also training ourselves in this peculiar practice of letting go of control. Mm-hmm. Right. And when we can do that, when there's, just enough effort to pay attention, because we don't just let the mind just drift, or we don't, it's not like being a couch potato, like we just sort of become a blob, a cognitive blob. No, we're trying to muster this kind of, particular kind of effort, mm-hmm. right? But not too much. We're not trying to get to a particular meditative state, right? And so, yeah, it's like right on that edge, which is so juicy and so hard to wrap the mind around. Mm-hmm. And to go back to what we were talking about earlier, it's perhaps best experienced experientially, because we can talk about it, and that can be a way in, conceptually through words. That's helpful. But then for some, it will be best learned kind of experientially, of like, wow, there was something happening in this day or in this sitting where I got it. I experienced something. I was paying attention, but then I was also kind of just letting things be. Maybe for the first time in a long time, we may hear our clients say, I just kind of let things be as they are.
I wonder if we could go back to the idea of retreats, because I feel like right now a lot of people are sort of stuck in a kind of forced retreat at the moment. And, we're changing a lot of our routines. I'm thinking about what you were saying about, our habits of consumption are changing, and we're having to stop and think, like I was Googling about how do I do my laundry the other day, or like, how do I put my groceries away? Like these really simple tasks are like, oh, suddenly we're thinking a lot more about these things at a very micro level, with some anxiety, but also with a lot of like awareness or mindfulness there too. But I'm just thinking about, being on retreats and some people are busier than ever. Some people are finding themselves having a lot of extra time. So I wonder, as a person who's a fan of retreats, and whether you might have any words of wisdom for how people might approach this enforced stay at home period.
Yes, in many ways unwanted, And I would start by saying let's not deny that for many people, this is unwanted.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of loss and grief associated with it, loss of income, loss of social connection, et cetera, et cetera. I heard a wonderful talk a day or two ago about the necessity of allowing ourselves to grieve right now. That in a way, the world as we knew it a few weeks ago is currently no longer that same world.
Yeah.
And arguably won't go back to being quite the same. So I think it's helpful to begin with some compassion for ourselves that we are upset. This is destabilizing and confusing, and it's unwanted in many ways for most of us. And we are in this predicament, we are in this situation. And so, we might say that the Buddhist method is let's make the best of it. Like here we are, these are the conditions as they are. And so there's all of that has changed on, we might call it the external level. Like, we can't go out, we can't go to the places that we used to go. We even have to be really careful about how we unpack our groceries and wipe things down and all of that stuff, right? And that's all very challenging and very disrupted on the external level. And we're all preoccupied with what's going to happen next, out there, what's going to happen, right? Is the curve going to flatten or not, and how much, and when it's going to be over? But then there's the other part of our experience, which is now what's going to happen inside me?
Mm-hmm.
What am I going to be experiencing inside myself? And that's a whole other aspect of the experience, because we're all in many ways, sitting with ourselves. We can't escape ourselves as easily as we used to, perhaps. And that can be very, very challenging.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's what retreat is. In part, it's a time where we encounter ourselves on a different level, much more intimate level. And it's not for the squeamish, it's not easy. It can be really quite daunting that we can't get away from ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's the work. And I think, one suggestion is to see that even though you may not like it and it may be stressful, but there is a real opportunity here to learn to be with yourself in a different way. Or another way to say it is, we'll either add a lot of suffering to this experience of forced isolation, or we can become curious about, so how can I be with this? What can I learn? How can I practice being in my enforced isolation in a way that I'm benefiting in some way? Like, okay, I'm actually learning to be with myself, even though I drive myself bananas. I'm so tired of being with me, myself, and I. I'm sure a lot of people are feeling that, even if they live with others. And of course, same goes to intimacy with housemates and family members and whoever people may live with, neighbors even. So the mindfulness method keeps reminding us there's an opportunity. There's an opportunity. One way to talk about it is we'll either kind of reinforce or bring out, what's less good inside us, the fearful, the impatient, the frustrated, the part of us that just wants to be, the next distraction, or we will, more kind of cultivate, as Alex said earlier, that image of just dropping a few more pebbles on the pile of what could be called good karma, beneficial mind states. That it's a time where we can practice a little more patience, acceptance, staying in the moment, in the sense of recognizing that it's just not helpful for us to spend a whole lot of time wondering about what's going to happen in the future, or reading the news, what the Buddhist tradition calls guarding the sense doors. Just being careful about what you're taking in through your senses, primarily through the media. How much news do we all really need now on a given day about the virus? And
yeah, this feels like a full circle moment from the start of our conversation when we were talking about your own experience on retreat and encountering your mind and the mess that's there, and being inspired and curious about moving towards that, and wanting to get to know that better, because that may be where many of us find ourselves now, in this kind of forced isolation, or stuck with our minds a lot more, as we are, as you said it so nicely, about encountering ourselves. We're really having to encounter ourselves, and maybe bringing some curiosity to that.
Yeah. And I want to be real too. Just like, I wasn't terribly curious back at that,
right, yeah.
About that first time. I was kind of horrified mostly. and I was, it's 25 years ago, but I was rather freaked out. I did keep my sense of humor about it. I thought there's a funny story in this, at least. There's something funny about, just how my mind is like, totally like this, barrel full of monkeys, as they say. But the curiosity came later. I've been able over the years to develop that thing, that responsive curiosity.
Yeah.
And so those are what the teachings point to, that they encourage us that there is a way to work with our difficult internal experiences, rather than just trying to push them away as much as possible, or being afraid of them. That there's a way to work with our sadness, our grief, our busy mind, our boredom, in a way that is helpful and is more resilient and sustainable. That this is something that will aid us through our lifespan, more, helpful states of mind. That's really what we're cultivating in this approach.
Thank you.
Thank you. And how do you recommend that people establish a meditation or mindfulness practice?
With gentleness and with patience. Just speaking kind of around the attitude, if you will, or the intention, as we've talked about intention, the intention to bring to it is to be wary of sort of black and white ideas about meditation has to be done in this way, or it should work in this way. So I would really encourage people to just kind of tinker with the practices that they encounter. Take them all with a grain of salt. No practice is intended or is a good fit for everyone at any given time. There are practices that at a certain time in your life might be helpful, like sitting down on a cushion and closing your eyes and focusing on your breath. At another time in life, that might not be such a good idea. It may not be a good idea to close your eyes and focus on your breath. That might be quite unhelpful. So that's a good, I think it's one of the good beginning frameworks is to keep in mind that everything is optional in the practices. And to not judge your experience. If you find that you're not getting very concentrated or you're not feeling particularly calm or peaceful or zen as you practice, don't make that wrong. As we've talked about curiosity, remember to be curious about it. It's like, so I wonder what that's about for me. Or, so there's this sort of agitated kind of experience that comes up for me when I sit down and try to do some sort of meditation, mindfulness practice. To not make it like pass or failure or success or failure. Just be like, so look at that. Look at that is one of my most helpful, I have found to be one of the most helpful mantras. It's like, look at that. Agitation is coming up, completely distracted, feeling frustrated. Look at that. No problem. So that said, so again, to quickly summarize, so to be non-judgmental and to be careful about any kind of black or white or kind of like should messages that are out there. You should close your eyes. You should sit down. You should feel peaceful. I often have said, meditation is not like a vending machine. The vending machine, you slide in your dollar, you press D3 and the peanut M&Ms come out every time, pretty much. Right? Meditation doesn't work that way. We never really know what we're going to get. So we got to drop those expectations like, I should be peaceful. No. What we're practicing is being present and noticing whatever is happening in a very non-judgmental way, kind of no exceptions. Whatever arises, it's okay. It's not wrong. It's just what's arising.
So paradoxically, establishing a mindfulness or meditation practice itself is an object for a mindful meditative approach. It's a field to practice the lessons of mindfulness and meditation. Yeah.
Which, like there it is again. It's another opportunity to be mindful, and it can be even one of the annoying cliches of the tradition of just like, well, there's another opportunity for mindfulness, but it's true. Even in, isn't that annoying? After a certain point, it's like, this too is an opportunity for mindfulness. But yes, and that can be not the easiest thing, because of course when people are getting started, they're looking for some guidance, and I'll get to that in a second. But almost like a preemptive part of it is to just remember, try to be non-judgmental and be as non-judgmental and drop your expectations as best you can. Right? That's the acceptance part of the practice. But then there is an effort part. So I would suggest that people explore some of the different concentration practices. And I'll just offer like a couple of different ones now. Like a good mindfulness practice might be simply, say, sitting in your chair, put your chair by the window, and just look outside and just notice what's happening in the sky. Maybe you notice the light changing on the tree. and the birds maybe coming and going and the clouds. And there you're just kind of quote unquote concentrating or being mindful of this kind of visual field. Perfect. And you'll notice your mind will drift away and you start to think about, oh, what am I going to have for lunch or whatever. And then you just come back and just be noticing this visual field. Similarly, you might sit and close your eyes and just listen to the sounds. And I mean, just for maybe 30 seconds to start. And if it feels pleasant, then you could continue for a minute or 2 or 5, just listening to the sounds coming and going on in the auditory field, including listening to the silences, the spaces between the sounds. Cars going by. I'm hearing some birds chirping out my window right now. And listening even into the silence of the room, perhaps if you're in a quiet place. Oh, how about that? Listening to silence, as weird as that might sound. So that might be, concentrating on the visuals, concentrating on the auditory experience. And those are like the non-embodied or less embodied practices where you don't have to focus in on your body, which can be helpful, especially if you're feeling a bit anxious. We feel our anxiety in the body. So if people are feeling anxious and they're not so sure they want to kind of sit with that or meditate on the body, take the attention out of the body. Mm-hmm. Just notice these things that are more external. Perfect. You're still training the attention to kind of come to heel, to kind of focus a little bit, and then fully expect that you'll notice your attention wander, and then you just bring it back gently, no self-criticism, just bring it back. Even if most of the time you're just kind of drifting and coming back, no problem. You're slowly training that muscle. And then maybe just the third one is a little more of a classic meditation would be to sit or stand or lie down or whatever, but generally we sit and close your eyes and soften your facial muscles, soften your shoulders, invite them to soften at least, and then just notice the flow of breath moment to moment. Just notice it coming and going. You could control the breath and, guide it to slow down a little bit. It can be really very rich and very soothing. For some people, this is not possible, but to really slow the breath down and just kind of geek out a little bit on your breath and just like, oh, how slow could I get my breath to go? And it can be a marvelous experience of just kind of like this simple focus of just the breath coming and going and just being curious, oh, how slow could this process go? Or you just let it flow at its own rhythm, no problem. So I would say start with simple practices, be gentle with yourself, try not to judge anything that happens, and kind of give yourself a pat on the back of like, oh, cool, I'm willing to tinker with this. I'm willing to try this thing.
I love this idea of tinker. Oh, go ahead. Yeah.
Well, just the last thing I was going to say, and then of course online there's lots of good aids. There's like these apps. Insight Timer is a nice one that's free. I believe Calm has a free version, and on those you can just set some sounds where you can just sort of listen to the sounds, or you can set some bells, and or you could tune into like a guided meditation. But what I just described is this kind of DIY. Just try it on your own. Make it real simple. And and Kate, you were just gonna say something.
Yeah, I was just gonna say I love the emphasis on tinkering because it sort of goes against that sort of top down. Here's the official practice. You have to do it that way, or else you're failing or something. So I really appreciate that, and it also reminds me of the Buddha's teaching around seek out your own enlightenment with diligence, like it's sort of your journey. So be experimental and try to work some of that stuff out in a way that's going to work for you. With some acceptance. And I also heard another mantra in what you were saying. You mentioned the, oh, look at that. So that's a good one. And then you also said no problem, like a handful of times. So I feel like that's another really good mantra. It's like, oh, no problem. Well, just invite that into the practice too.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you for highlighting that. Yeah, definitely. Those are Great mantras. I use them all. No problem. It's okay. Anxious? No problem. It's okay.
Right.
No worries.
Yeah.
And where can people find you, engage with you, and or your work?
Yeah. Well, I'm a member of the Institute for Meditation and Psychotherapy, which is a terrific organization for therapists who are a little prone to mindfulness or a little curious about mindfulness. So you don't have to be a big meditator or anything like that. That's a wonderful place to connect with me and other folks who are on this path and using some of these methodologies. We have lots of great activities going on, many of which, of course, now are transitioning to online. So that's meditationandpsychotherapy.org. I'm reachable through my practice in Cambridge, Massachusetts. My website is cambridgemindbody.com. And if anybody wants to learn more about any of that stuff that I mentioned, including the retreat work that I'm doing, there's links there on that site, and be happy to chat with anybody about any of the above.
Thank you very much.
Great. Thanks for your time today, Doug. We really appreciated this conversation.
Terrific. Thank you both. Delightful to talk with you both. And thank you for the service that you're doing for the community. It's really great. And you're doing it with a lot of energy and a lot of love. That's evident. So yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Doug.
Thanks for listening today. This podcast was brought to you by the Institute for Meditation and Psychotherapy, a nonprofit organization dedicated to the integration of mindfulness, meditation, and psychotherapy. For more information, visit meditationandpsychotherapy.org.